Everybody knows Pablo Escobar is the man who didn't take no for an answer. He gained his power through bribery and brutal violence. If you refused his bribe, not only would you be killed, so would your family. Pablo Escobar was ruthless. Similarly, El Mencho rose from rags to riches. Today he's a notorious drug lord and the leader of the dangerous Jalisco New Generation Cartel, a cartel known for its brutal tactics, including mass killings, targeted assassinations, and torture. No wonder why he's also Mexico's most wanted man. Even though they were both criminals famous for drug trafficking and violence, they ran their drug cartels in completely different ways. But first, let's delve into the start of their vicious careers. El Mencho's first name was Ruben. He changed it to Nemesio in honor of his godfather. He had many other aliases throughout his life undercover, while Pablo Escobar had one and only one name: Pablo Escobar. Pablo's father was a farmer and his mother a school teacher. The Escobars moved to Envigado, Colombia, a suburb of Medellin. Pablo took his first baby step in making a successful career in drug smuggling by selling fake diplomas, smuggling stereo equipment, and stealing tombstones to resell. From there on, he became a part of a car theft gang, which resulted in his first arrest in 1974. His goal in college was to become a criminal lawyer, a politician, and eventually a president, but it wasn't possible due to the lack of money. Now, El Mencho's parents were farmers as well, in Aguililla, Michoacán, the world's avocado capital. El Mencho immigrated illegally to the U.S. state of California in the 1980s, and his journey from picking avocados as a boy to becoming the head of the organized crime group cartel, Jalisco Nueva Generación, known as CJNG, began. In 1986, at the age of 19, El Mencho was first arrested for stolen property and carrying a loaded gun. He remained in the shadows, sneaking across the US-Mexican border with different aliases, like once sneaking in and out of the kitchen to grab a snack. He made it look easy. He probably had a list of names already written out to choose for his trips: Ruben Avila, Jose Lopez Prieto, Miguel Valadez, Carlos Hernandez Mendoza, Roberto Salgado, and many more. Now, during this time, DEA and Mexican investigators believed he became involved with meth and heroin gangs with his brother-in-law, Abigail Gonzalez Valencia. El Mencho was deported several times to Mexico, but that sneaky guy made his way back to San Francisco. He was arrested again in 1992 on federal drug charges in Sacramento, California. 26-year-old El Mencho and his brother Abraham were at a bar for a heroin deal, 5 ounces for $9,500. El Mencho was clever enough to notice that the transaction was a setup by the police. A wiretap conversation revealed that he told his brother that the buyers handed out perfectly stacked dollar bills instead of loose ones. They were both arrested. El Mencho insisted he was innocent. He was given options. If he pleaded not guilty, his brother-in-law would face life in prison due to his drug felony record. He pleaded guilty to protect his brother from life imprisonment, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison at the Big Spring Correctional Center in Texas. After 3 years, he was released on parole and deported once again to Mexico at the age of 30. He was back to his old habits. El Mencho went to Tijuana, a border town for feuding Mexican cartels. He expanded his drug smuggling business there. He became a threat to the Arellano Felix organization. As he gained power, they ordered him to leave. After all that crime he was involved in, he surprisingly decided to join the local police forces in Tomatlan, in the state of Jalisco. But he probably thought being a good guy was no fun and left the police to join the Milenio cartel. After he returned to his native Michoacán, he dug his hands deep into the cartel by marrying one of the clan leader's sister, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia. The Milenio cartel formed Los Queenies and joined hands with the Colombian cocaine suppliers. They began shipping from Mexico to the US, and El Mencho slowly rose to power. Unlike El Mencho, Pablo stayed in Colombia and didn't stay in the shadows or used aliases. He resorted to violent crimes for money, employing dangerous criminals to kidnap people and demand ransoms. His gang became known for the kidnapping of businessman Diego Echevarria, who was eventually killed. Escobar received a ransom of $50,000. He was trained in organized crime before cocaine trading flourished in Colombia. In the mid-1970s, Fabio Restrepo, one of Colombia's first drug dealers, shipped out around 40 to 60 kilos of cocaine to Miami once or twice a year. In 1975, he was assassinated, and Pablo seized that market and business. After a year during his arrest, DAS agents found 39 kilos of cocaine in the spare tire of Escobar's car. Escobar managed to replace the first judge in the lawsuit and bribed the second judge, so he was released along with the other prisoners. The following year, the agent who arrested Escobar was assassinated. Escobar continued to collude with law enforcement in the same pattern. His strategy was known as silver or lead, or money or bullets. In the mid-1970s, Escobar founded his criminal organization, which became known as the Medellin Cartel. And by the end of 1978, some 19,000 kilos of cocaine was smuggled to the U.S. under everyone's nose. Unlike El Mencho, who worked with his brother-in-law, Pablo's notable partners were the Ochoa brothers, Juan David, Jorge Luis, and Fabio. As the number of crackheads increased in the U.S., Escobar organized more smuggling shipments, routes, and distribution networks into South Florida, California, and Puerto Rico, among many other parts of the country. He and Cartel co-founder Carlos Leder developed a new transshipment point in the Bahamas, an island called Norman's Cay, southeast of the Florida coast. Now, according to some reports, he was worth approximately $25 billion, a lavish lifestyle that included a 7,000-acre estate called Hacienda Nápoles, named after Naples, Italy, in Colombia. It reportedly cost $63 million and featured a soccer field, dinosaur statues, artificial lakes, a bullfighting arena, an airstrip, and a tennis court. The property also had a zoo that housed 200 animals, including giraffes, hippos, and camels, among many others. Many of these creatures were smuggled into the country on Escobar's drug planes. While Escobar had a zoo on his estate, El Mencho was like a ghost, rarely seen in public, and his wanted photos were old and hazy. He didn't flash his wealth like the other historical kingpins, speeding through the streets of Mexico in Lamborghinis. He was more drawn to power than money. He was mostly on a horse in the mountains of Jalisco, or indulging in bull or cockfights. He was an enemy of the state. Milenio was glad to have a skilled sicario, or assassin, join their team. They let El Mencho lead one of their cells in Guadalajara as a leader of an assassin squad. They targeted the cartel Los Zetas, where they became known as Los Mata Zetas, or the Zeta Killers, declaring to protect residents from the cartel. The locals were in for a surprise from El Mencho, who was even more violent than they thought. The Milenio cartel moved its HQ to Guadalajara, also known as the Mexican Silicon Valley, after threats and attacks from enemies. El Mencho had high hopes from Milenio. He expected to be given a top position, but some leaders, including Oscar Orlando, got arrested in 2008 and 2009. But does one think El Mencho would just sit back and relax? No, he and his brother-in-law plotted revenge in 2009 after unrest in the cartel. He was violent and organized, and that's how he made it to the top. The Great Milenio Cartel split in two. One side was known as La Resistencia, the Resistance, and the other was known as Los Mata Zetas, or the Zeta Killers, headed by El Mencho. La Resistencia accused the Los Mata Zetas of turning in Oscar Orlando to the authorities. Violence and bloodshed ensued. The two groups fought for territory. To legitimize its presence, El Mencho's group launched a propaganda campaign against its enemies, denouncing extortions done by rival gangs against civilians, businessmen, and government authorities. Los Mata Zetas eventually won the war and consolidated their influence in western Mexico. The birth of Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, or CJNG, also birthed chaos and violence that would soon erupt in the state of Mexico. El Mencho now controls various key drug trafficking hubs and routes in Mexico and orders around the Plaza Boss, or Capo. His cartel dominates much of Guadalajara and controls the outskirts of the state of Jalisco, as well as other states such as Colima and Michoacán. CJNG has spread to the majority of Mexico's 32 states, with an increasing authority in Tijuana and Mexico City. CJNG grew by territorial expansion and corrupted government officials. It became one of the leading criminal organizations in Mexico. El Mencho in no time became one of the most wanted criminals. He was known for his aggressive and sensationalist displays of public violence. He used extreme savagery like acid baths, cannibalism, and decapitations to instill fear in his victims. He was threatening and violent. A phone call between El Mencho and an unidentified cop was recorded.
Delta 1. Hey, ¿quién habla? Mira bien, hijo de tu madre. Soy Mencho, güey. Relaja tu gente a la verga. Soy Mencho, güey. Relaja tus partidas. Si no te voy a partir tienes toda tu bola de perros. Te tengo identificado 30 güeyes. Hasta tus perros te voy a matar si no te relajas, güey. ¿Cómo ves? Ya está, señor. Ahorita nos vamos.
Many of the grotesque, skin-crawling pictures are posted online, including videos of murder and torture, images of bodies hanging on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. They operate in 8 states, Jalisco and surrounding areas. It fights rival drug groups in Morelos, Guerrero, and Michoacán. Internationally, they're doing pretty well and have ties to criminal groups in the US, Europe, Latin America, Asia, and Africa, where trafficking cocaine and methamphetamine is their main focus. The cartel uses Pacific routes to move drugs, importing cocaine from Colombia and fentanyl from China. He has contacts in Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and throughout Central America and the United States. Illegal immigration did pay off for El Mencho. The drugs and violence of El Mencho and CJNG extend far beyond the US-Mexican border. Their presence has been discovered in at least 35 states and Puerto Rico. The government estimates that El Mencho's group has about $50 billion in total assets. El Mencho's brother-in-law was arrested in 2015, who headed the Los Queenies. Abigail was skilled in strategizing consumer and market changes. They moved from methamphetamine production to heroin and fentanyl, based on consumer demands. Fentanyl, a deadly drug which is 50 times stronger than heroin and has exceeded heroin as America's most illicit drug, while Escobar was known for drug trafficking cocaine. And in the 1980s, Escobar's Medellin cartel was responsible for 80% of the cocaine that was sent to the United States. El Mencho would travel across Jalisco, Michoacán, Colima, and Nayarit, mostly across mountains and rural terrains to escape security forces. Authorities say he has an inner circle of highly skilled and heavily armed mercenaries with former military training. The second security circle is larger and serves to notify the inner circle of suspicious activities. In October 2018, a joint law enforcement measure was announced against the CJNG, and El Mencho's bounty was increased from $5 million to $10 million US.
Tonight, the DEA is offering $10 million for information leading to the arrest of the Mexican drug kingpin known as El Mencho.
This increase was one of the largest in the history of the narcotics reward program. While El Mencho was hostile and always hiding, Escobar became involved in philanthropy in Colombia. He spent millions developing Medellin's poorest neighborhoods. He built roads, soccer fields, and housing complexes. And because of his charitable work, he was known as Robin Hood Paisa. He entered into politics in the 1970s. His goal since the beginning: participated in forming the Liberal Party of Colombia, and he made it to the Colombian Congress in 1982. The new Minister of Justice accused Escobar of criminal activity from the beginning. Liberal leader Luis Carlos Galán kicked out Escobar from the party. Escobar didn't seem to do well in politics, and he retired in 1984. They forgot who they were messing with. Both of them were assassinated by his orders. Escobar was responsible for killing about 4,000 people, including an estimated 200 judges, 1,000 police, journalists, and government officials. Luis was assassinated in 1989, and he planted a bomb on Avianca Flight 203 in an attempted assassination on Galán's successor, Cesar Gaviria Trujillo, who missed the plane and survived. It killed 107 people in the blast, including 2 Americans. The government convinced Escobar to surrender and cease criminal activity in exchange for a reduced sentence and better treatment during captivity. He He surrendered in 1991 to the Colombian authorities. Escobar was in his own luxurious private so-called prison La Catedral. Not only did the facility include a nightclub, sauna, waterfall, and a soccer field, it also had computers, fax machines, and a telephone. After Escobar brutally tortured 2 cartel members at La Catedral, authorities decided to transfer him to a real prison. He escaped, as his men came to know beforehand. El Mencho escaped the manhunt by the Mexican federal police several times. He planned tactics, once setting 37 vehicles on fire to block the roads. A close associate of El Mencho was killed in a shootout once, due to an attack that CJNG had on the police without hesitation, killing 15 policemen and wounding 5 more in another incident. Same day, the police chief of Zicolco, de Torres, was targeted and killed by El Mencho's hitman. A month later, the Mexican government launched Operation Jalisco to capture leaders of the cartels in Jalisco. El Mencho didn't back down. His heavily armed men shot down an army helicopter, killing 9 soldiers. They set 39 buses, 11 banks, and 16 gas stations on fire. El Mencho escaped unharmed. On the 2nd of December 1993, Escobar celebrated his 44th birthday without a party, enjoying cake, wine, and marijuana. The next day, a massive manhunt by the Colombian Special Forces and the United States government was launched against drug traffickers. His hideout in Medellin was discovered. Escobar, with his bodyguard, managed to get to the roof of the building. After a chase with gunshots, he was fatally wounded. Some think Escobar took his own life. The drug lord, who was to be extradited to the US after an arrest, said once, "I would rather have a grave in Colombia than a jail in the US." After Escobar's death, the Medellin cartel broke. The cocaine market was taken over by the Cali cartel until the mid-1990s, when their leaders were captured. Many people mourned his death for days, as he was their Robin Hood and had helped many poor in the city. Around 25,000 people attended that funeral. The king of cocaine was buried at the Mont Sacro Cemetery. El Mencho was reported to be suffering from kidney disease. He had built a hospital in the village of El Alquihuatl for his regular treatment. In February 2022, there were confirmed reports that El Mencho had died from respiratory arrest while undergoing treatment in a private hospital in Guadalajara. Though there is no concrete evidence to prove that he is dead, the ghost might still be prowling the terrains of Jalisco.